Hi everyone, and welcome to my third video on the subvariations of variation 34. In this video I'm going to cover the rest of the subvariation, variations 11 through 17. Subvariation 11 is soutille. We now have 16th notes, and it's soutille in double stops. Hopefully you've already practiced this variation in double stops a lot, like I recommended in the video I made on the original variation 34, that you practice it like this. Practice it in double stops. I always practice it in double stops before I start practicing the variation and the subvariation, so that my left hand is very secure. So the double stops as such are not such a problem in this soutille variation in double stops. I explained soutille in detail in the video I made on variation 16, so I'll put the link in the description for you. If you're doing soutille in double stops, you need a little bit more weight, and I found it helpful to concentrate on the lower string, just to follow the lower string with my bow, feel the lower string a little more than I feel the higher string. It also should be the louder one of the two, because that's where we have the melody. But it's important to concentrate on the lower string when you're doing the soutille in double stops. Somehow that made it more precise in my case. In general, there's two ways of practicing soutille. The one is that you start with very small détaché and then allow the bow to bounce. The other one is starting spiccato and speeding up. We're going to start with the détaché version. You do very small détaché about in the middle of the bow where you want to do the soutille, and then by taking weight off of your first finger slightly, you allow the bow to bounce. You see, I started détaché and I had to add quite a lot of weight, otherwise the bow would have bounced. And then I took some weight away and allowed the bow to bounce. The other way to practice this is to start spiccato and speed up. Notice when you start spiccato, as you speed up, the bowing becomes more passive. You're just speeding up, but it feels as if the bow is doing more on its own. Subvariation 12 is exactly the same bowing as variation 27. Again, I'll have the link in the description because I go into this bowing more detailed in variation 27. Here, I just want to remind you of a few details. Your arm position must be on the higher of the two strings you're working with, and you just flick up your wrist for the lower string, because you can't do the string crossings with your whole arm. You'd be moving too much mass. You have to do it with your wrist, and you have your arm position on the higher string and you flick your wrist up for the lower string. I'll show you slowly, and it's a good idea to do this slowly a few times just to show your hand what you want it to do. It's just a wrist movement. So doing this slowly once or twice really does help. variation is the same as subvariation B from variation 27. It's the same bowing. Again, I'll have the link in the description for you. It's a good idea to practice this a little bit slower as spiccato to get used to the coordination. Practice it slowly as spiccato to get used to the coordination, and then also practice it slowly détaché using very, very little bow as a preparation for the soutille. By practicing it like that, remember, the wrist does the string crossings. Very little bow, and then speed up gradually. And as you speed up, allow the bow to bounce. I have to add weight for the détaché at first, and then as I'm speeding up, I can feel my bow is wanting to bounce. It wants to bounce, and then I allow it to bounce. So starting slowly with détaché and then speeding up, like I did within one figure at first before you put them all together, but within one bar, repeating it over and over again, speeding up and then allowing the bow to bounce when you feel it wants to bounce. You can tell it wants to bounce if you have to add more weight to stop it from bouncing. So when you feel you need to do something to stop it from bouncing, then you know it wants to bounce, and then by not adding the weight, moving the weight more towards the middle and fourth finger of your hand, then the bow will bounce on its own. This subvariation is the same as subvariation A of variation 27. So there again, I have the link in the description for you. The subvariation is a bit more balanced because we have 2 notes on the lower string and 2 notes on the higher string. Here it's a good idea to also play it spiccato a bit slower once to get used to the coordination. And then also practice a détaché on the string, starting a little bit slower. Make sure you have very close string crossings. You don't want your string crossings to be any bigger than they have to be. Nearly double stops. Keep the bow very close to the next string. Start slowly détaché, and as before, speed up gradually and allow the bow to bounce. It helps a lot at first to do this just with one bar, repeating one bar, so that you don't have to concentrate on the left hand until your bow can do it, and then you can play several bars. Just by speeding up, I allowed my bow to bounce by taking weight away from the first finger, leaning the hand slightly towards the fourth finger. It's very slight. One can't see it. And with the close string crossings, it almost feels like I'm doing double stops. Subvariation 15 is an asymmetrical bowing. That makes it a bit more difficult than the previous one. The fact that this is asymmetrical is more of a problem for our brain than it is for our bow. Our bow doesn't really care where the string crossings are. Our brain does. So here it's a good idea to practice it spiccato, a bit slower, to get used to the coordination. Practice it at that speed to get used to the coordination, and then also practice it détaché on the string. First just take one bar and repeat that over and over again. First, détacher on the string and then very gradually speed it up. By very gradually speeding it up, then you just allow the bow to bounce as from a certain speed. The bow will want to bounce, and you will feel that because you will notice that you have to do something to stop it bounce. You need to add weight to stop it from bouncing. That's how you know that it wants to bounce. So then you just take the weight away from the first finger towards the fourth finger, and then the bow will bounce on its own. I found it helps a lot to put a small accent with bow speed onto the first note of each group of 4. Somehow that helps. Perhaps it's because it makes it clear for my brain where the string crossing is. In any case, I found that helpful. It might be that you find that helpful as well. Just a little accent with some bow speed on the first note of each group of 4. Sub-variation 16 I like very much because it reminds me of a bass guitar line of a 1980s rock band, so I like this one very much. The principle is the same as sub-variation 15. It is also not symmetrical, so our brain needs to get used to it. Our bow less so, our brain needs to get used to it. So it's a good idea to practice it a bit slower in spiccato first. To put a bit of an accent on the third note of each group of 4. I'll show you a little bit exaggerated. That helps, but not as much as I just showed you, just a little bit of an accent. That helps a lot with this bowing. Then practice it détaché on the string at a medium speed and concentrate just on one bar, speeding it up gradually, allowing the bow to bounce. So you just speed it up gradually. Don't do this one faster than you actually feel you can control it. You will get a lot of benefit even if you can't do this one so fast. It will get faster with time. It's a matter of knowing exactly where the string crossing is. That's why that accent on the higher string helps a lot with this sub-variation. Sub-variation 17 is soutille in triplets. Soutille in triplets as such is not symmetrical because you have down, up, and then up, down, up. So that takes a little bit of getting used to. It's usually a good idea for soutille in triplets to build up soutille from the beginning one more time. First by doing it slowly, spiccato. Here it helps a lot to put an accent on the first up bow of the higher string. I'm exaggerating a little bit. It doesn't have to be that much, but a bit of an accent on the first up bow of the higher string helps a lot with the clarity in this bowing. I found that very, very helpful. See if you could speed the spiccato up a little bit. And then see if you can speed it up all the way to soutille. At first, that's a good idea to do that just with one figure. It's a good idea to do that just with one figure first, because then your left hand is doing the same thing all the time. You can concentrate completely on your bow and see if you could just speed up the spiccato until it's a soutille. The other way of building up soutille is to start détaché and then allowing the bow to bounce. Here too, it's very good to put an accent on the first up bow of the higher string. And also just work on one figure first. If you start détaché using very, very little bow and speed up, as from a certain speed, your bow is going to want to bounce, and then you just allow it to bounce. So that's how you build up the soutille in triplets. And I have to say, what helped me most was to discover that it helps to put an accent on the first of each up bow on the higher string. That really helped me a lot to get this to be clear and for me to know what my bow was supposed to do. Okay, that was 17 sub-variations for you. This is the end of the third video on the sub-variations. I hope you enjoyed them. As always, let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and happy practicing!